let's go ahead and start the show. What's up, you beautiful people? This is Gary Horton. This is the NWA. It is the podcast celebrating the past, present, future, history, legacy, and tradition of the greatest pro wrestling entity of all time. We're talking about the National Wrestling Alliance. And as always, I am joined by the other members of the Bearded Trio. We're talking about Hey, it's Will.Daily. Hello, Hey, it's Will.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome.
And the Dr. McLovin is what he would prefer to be known as. Dr. Rob Stinson is here.
Good evening, guys. Thanks for hanging out with us, man. Beautiful Sunday.
We're going to take you guys all the way, if we're ready to go, we're going to take you all the way back to 1986. That was it. That was my time machine.
Yeah, you got to do the Wayne's World. There you go.
Oh, man. So 1986 might have been one of the hottest years in pro wrestling history. You may not see that from the outside looking in. However, a lot of promotions at this time, they're tripping over themselves. You got, I think, like Super Clash 3 was around this time, and they're just trying to find some ways to stay relevant. Because if you keep in mind, like right before this, a year before this, in 85, what was it, March 31st, 1985, WrestleMania had just happened. So now WWF is blowing up. And they've got celebrities. They've got hot stuff going on. And so other promotions are trying to make themselves relevant again. And WrestleMania was hugely successful. That event alone has drawn over 19,121 people, seen by over a million more on closed circuit TV. In light of this, that's a lot to keep up with. WWE or F was showing up on television all over everywhere. But one promotion that was not struggling as much, that had a specific territory and kept with it, was Jim Crockett Promotions. These guys were on fire. And during this time, they were having 1986 would actually end up being their best year yet. They had a territory stretching all the way from Maryland down through the Carolinas and Georgia, several other states. And for them, actually this time, what is this? 30, what is it? 96, 2016, 34. Yeah, I was trying to figure it up in my head. 34 years ago on this day, marked a time when they were in the middle of one of their biggest events of all time. The previous year, PWI and the NWA had put on a co-branded show named by Dusty Rhodes. It was called The Great American Bash, and it was a huge success. I was listening to several people talk about The Great American Bash, and Jim Cornette specifically, I remember, was saying that this was the first glimpse that Dusty had. Dusty had the book at this time. He was booking all of the stuff, and he had put a lot of pieces in place. And Great American Bash 1980, first moment where he and Crockett had finally hit open pitch that you've got this. This is working. We're really getting somewhere. So moving along into 1986, you had Starrcade 86, which was the Night of the Skywalkers. And in that show in particular, that was the first moment that they, the way Cornette describes it, that he realized not only do we have it, we can go huge. We are drawing a lot of money and we are on fire right now. This is going to be big. So, looking to capitalize on all of this, Rhodes and Crockett came up with the idea that the NWA, they had already been working on it, but would now start to build some of the hottest feuds in pro wrestling history. If they had anything going for them, it was that they had some of the best storylines that there were out there. And they were going to use this to take the whole summer and start a brand new giant tour to capitalize on this thing. And they would call it the Great American Bash. This was, of course, the second ever Great American Bash, but now it was going to be like a huge tour. And so that was it. So I don't know about you guys, but I mean, Rob, I'm sure this was, I think you were like 2 around this time in 86. So you probably know this well, but I did not know before we jumped into this show that this Great American Bash, like when we decided on it, I didn't know right away. This was not a one show thing. This was like a series of shows that ran the entire summer from like July to like the beginning of August. Do you have any fond memories of this time period?
Yep. 13 shows in 30 days. I actually got to attend a show. And I think Ricky Morton and Ric Flair wrestled in the main event of that particular show. But amazing. And just so you know, this is one of the like inspirations behind the promotion of the Aldous Crusade. This concept of, hey, I'm going to defend this title multiple times in so many days. I think Nick Aldis did it in 60 days and double the defenses, but same gist. So yes, and you're absolutely right. This is the NWA at its high water mark. I know Jay Cal doesn't like us talking about wilderness years, and we can talk about that on another broadcast, but this is the anti-wilderness period. This is it at the pinnacle of its commercial success. And it was 13 times in 30 days. And I know, I think James Lawrence said he'd been to the Philly show. And if you've been to one, you know, man, in those days, it was fire. The audience was just fluid with emotion.
Yeah, the looking back on it, I was looking at some numbers from around this time, and this was arguably, I think, based on the numbers, not arguably even, this was the Crockett's best year in pro wrestling. They earned a gross of $21 million for that year, and that in today's money, they were estimating would be around $50 million. So they were raking in the cash. In fact, if you go back and listen to Cornette on his podcast, does a deep dive into the numbers of things during this time. And he talks about a random day in the year on February 2nd, 1986, where on that day, professional wrestling in general drew 70,000 people all over the country paid into live events. Now, 3 of those events were Crockett events. They had like 12,000 in Hamilton, Ontario, headlined by Flair and Dusty versus the Road Warriors. 12K in Charlotte with Rock and Roll versus the Midnight Express. And then 7K at the Omni right after that, where everybody came together for a show they did called Superstars on the Superstation, which would be the point, because at this high watermark, as you put it, the Superstars on the Superstation would be kind of the beginning of what would lead into the Great American Bash tour. This was kind of the setup for all of the shows that were going on in this event. You had things like Dusty Rhodes really getting into his feud here with the Four Horsemen, and he battled Tully Blanchard at this show, and they went to a draw due to interference, and he was having an issue with Ric Flair. Obviously, Ric Flair would go on in the main event of this particular show to beat Ron Garvin to win back the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship, and so that would kind of build on that feud. You had the Magnum TA and Nikita Koloff stuff going on, and just several different things that like built to matches that were going to be paid off, or like significant parts of the feuds would happen during the Great American Bash tour.
Yeah, and here's one thing to keep in mind too.
Yes,
when you talk about all those title defenses, it's not like it is now. So I went to a SmackDown house show like 2 years ago, and I saw Charlotte versus Asuka, and it was a great match. But you know, if you follow the house show circuit and cards, that same match happened like every night. So they were just replaying the same matches over and over. Ric Flair defended his title during this tour against somebody different just about every night. So he defended against Ricky Morton, as Rob, you just mentioned. He defended against Hawk and Animal separately, the Road Warriors, Ron Garvin, Nikita Koloff, Magnum TA, Dusty, obviously, that we're going to talk about, Wahoo McDaniel. Like it was a different person each event. So it wasn't like, when we think about that now, like, oh, you know, similar, like you said, Rob, to the Aldous Crusade. I mean, it was a different person every match. It wasn't this like what we're used to in the mainstream house show circuit, where it's like they're going to replay the same match over and over just for different crowds because it's not on TV. This was not like that. This was, I mean, Ric Flair was defending that title against formidable opponents night after night. I mean, sometimes with only one night or no night break in between. So just to put that into perspective of what these guys were doing from a performance and just a wrestling level.
And when you look at these cards, this is something I think that the modern iteration of the NWA does so well. If you look at one of the Bash 86 cards, and I'll just use the standard packaged one, that's basically a compilation of highlights. When you would get the VHS version or the DVD or the digital version of Bash 86, it's basically a compilation of highlights from the 13 shows. But when you look at that, it's like watching an NWA show. The strength of the storytelling on the card is important from top to bottom. Like when you're talking about Jimmy Valiant and his legendary feud with number one Paul Jones in the Army. As a fan in those days, being just a young, just being 10 years old, 11 years old, like that had a lot of meaning to me as a kid. I was in tune with that more than I was with just about anything else, even though titles weren't on the line. Of course, the Rock and Roll Express were out there, Pinnacle, the Road Warriors, Magnum and Nikita. The whole card, even when like Denny Brown, or Sam Houston, who were in the junior heavyweight title picture at the time, even that had a lot of meaning. And I think the NWA, some of their brilliance has to do with building very meaningful storylines throughout the card. It's not always, obviously everything is about the belts. You want to get belts, but there's important content and storytelling that doesn't just involve the belts, and they nailed it with this.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And now, obviously, like we're talking about, there were several, more than several. I mean, one of the things that, like, I saw a lot of wrestlers talking about is that Ric Flair got people amped up about this situation. Now, these guys were making, by the way, money was awesome for the wrestlers during this time, at least for most of them. And so you would get a lot based on the way I understand it is like a lot of the guys would share the house. So Ric Flair teased everyone during this time. It got everybody amped up to perform to their fullest during this tour, because he would tell them, there are 14 shows for the Great American Bash. This is 14 Starcades that are going to happen right now in July. It's going to be huge. So everybody wanted to be on top of their game, and they wanted to deliver this on this. And I just thought that was kind of interesting that he kind of had to pump them along. But they did. Like Will said, this wasn't just like some standard house show stuff. They were having unique matches and going all in on these matches. And you'll see, we're going to focus on, I keep meaning to say this week, we're going to focus more on the July 26th show from the Great American Bash, as that's what we're celebrating the anniversary of today. But we can, talk a little bit about the others as we want to. The main thing, if you're looking at the WWE network, the only ones you can actually watch on the network officially are July 5th and July 26th. So that's kind of interesting. Those are available in their hidden gem stuff. But anyway, I say all that to say they during the promotion of the Great American Bash, realized what the WWF was doing as far as star power and using the celebrities and that kind of thing. Now, this is going to obviously have a little bit more of a Southern tinge to it because of the territories we're talking about. But during this time, in the Superstars on the Superstation show, Dusty Rhodes had a sit-down interview with Tony Schiavone that also had Willie Nelson hanging out with him. Willie Nelson actually performed on several of the shows, leading into the events. They also had guys like George Jones there and Waylon Jennings. So definitely more of a country style thing, but that makes a lot of sense considering the audience. But they were pulling in star power. This Great American Bash tour was meant to be, well, like Ric Flair said, 14 Starcades. It was meant to be a huge deal. These are all WrestleManias in their own right, So that part of it I thought was really interesting. It's definitely not just a house show type thing. And the feuds that are built up in this thing are amazing. Like you guys were talking about. For me alone, just the Magnum TA Nikita Koloff stuff was just outstanding. You've got a best of 7 series going on for the US title. And that alone, I think, drew people in because I mean, I guess we could get more into it later, but Magnum TA at this time, people that don't realize, as you go back and look at Magnum TA, he was the hot baby face, like the guy like coming up, who was getting ready to take over the world at this time. And basically, I assume, Rob, it probably felt a lot like how Sting felt during the Great American Bash the last time we watched one. It was probably like he was kind of sort of working his way into that position a little bit, it felt like.
Yeah, I mean, just for those who weren't familiar with the Crockett era so much, if you're watching the NWA today, you get the feel of like somebody like an Eddie Kingston or somebody like an Eli Drake. It's got that sort, or a Trevor Murdoch, man. These guys are like very, very popular babies that can, I hate to say it, use that term loosely, but it had that same sort of feel. Magnum TA was the heir apparent. I mean, he was the one that, you know, in those days, the U.S. Championship was considered the number one contender belt. You had a national title and a TV title. Interestingly, you know, the TV title was actually considered a world championship in those days. They called it the World's Television Championship. But the U.S. title was considered the next most important belt. And Magnum TA was, by all accounts, and this is no secret, for everybody knows this, he was the one that was the designated heir to Ric Flair.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, just to run through it, I mean, you had the matchups like the July 5th show. That's the other big one you'll hear about. Like I said, that's on the WWE Network, which had matches like Robert Gibson versus Black Bart. You had Ole and Arn Anderson versus Sam Houston, Nelson Royal. You had a bunkhouse match between Manny Fernandez and Baron von Raschke. An Indian strap match on that show with Wahoo McDaniel and Jimmy Garvin. Ron Garvin versus Tully Blanchard, the Road Warriors versus the Koloffs, Jimmy Valiant versus Shaska Watley, Dusty Rhodes, Magnum TA, and Baby Doll versus the Midnight Express, and Ric Flair versus Ricky Morton was the main event for that one for the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. How about Ric Flair going all the way back to 1986, defending against Ricky Morton? And just to think that Ricky Morton in 2019 was still fighting for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship.
Yeah. And Gary, again, I've only heard this. I've heard Ricky say this before in a shoot interview or something, but it's not like Ricky Morton was just some upstart. They had a very, very intense feud. I mean, and guys like Arn Anderson will talk about it. You want to talk about like upsetting a crowd? Try beating up Ricky Morton in a live audience. They attacked Ricky Morton and almost didn't get out of the arena. The fans almost rioted. Ricky Morton was over like Rover, man. He was freaking like, he was over like Tommy Rich was in the early 80s. I mean, he was the biggest, most popular guy. And there was legitimate, serious talk, I'm told, that they were going to put the belt on Ricky Morton for a transitional reign. But Ricky didn't want to do it because that would have implications for he and Robert. And I've heard Ricky say that before. I can't pinpoint it, but I think probably some of you in the chat may have heard the same thing, and Gary, you probably have. But this was not just a little sideshow. Ricky Morton was very much in the title discussion at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Robert Gibson had a match during one of these shows with him too, and I heard nothing but good things about that. That Robert Gibson was an excellent wrestler who never got as much credit because he's in there next to Ricky Morton, who can sell like nobody's business and is always like the focal point of the team for the most part. But Flair did defend against Robert Gibson in one of those matches, and just thought that was kind of interesting. And I had a list.
Hawk and Animal both getting a shot, you know, individually.
Yeah, that's absolutely, that's all.
That's the thing, man, that those guys were so versatile. We're not used to this, again, not to keep harping on this then versus now thing, but what we don't realize was just the versatility of these guys and their talent back then. They could wrestle a phenomenal tag team match one night and then turn around a night or two nights later and wrestle in a world title match and give a stellar performance in that. You know, how often do we see that nowadays? It's surreal.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. If I could just take a quick moment to break here real quick, something I'm just proud of us guys together. As Front Row said, we broke something and it wasn't Stinson's spirit this time. Nick Aldis has just tweeted out directly to Bruce Pritchard saying, "Hi, Bruce Pritchard. Your ignorant comments about me had me in an all-time low, kind of like your Raw ratings. However, there are a few Hall of Famers that seem to have a different opinion, some of which are featured below." And he has a video that he's posting along with this. And he says, "P.S. I will be live on Busted Open Radio tomorrow morning." So there you go. So
let
just
him know. Go
you,
get him.
You heard it here first. And yeah, get him, champ. Absolutely.
It's like it's like we can, like you got wrestling with the MMA in there. We let our family members, we let them talk trash, but we don't let anybody else. It's like my brother. My brother as a kid, I can mess with my brother, but nobody else can. You mess with our champion, like him or not, he's our champion. He's the real world's champion. You cross the freaking line, dude. So I hope Nick Aldis makes this Joker famous tomorrow in a way that Bruce Pritchard has never been famous.
Woof. Oh, love seeing Rob get all fired up. All right, so let's move into the actual card, guest. Unless there's any other stuff you want to some of the matches, I'm sure that Rob probably has some good insight into what these matches were all about. Mainly jumping right into we're talking about again July 26, 1986. That was out of Greensboro, North Carolina, the Greensboro Coliseum, a hot wrestling town for sure. And this is going to be headlined by the Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair NWA World's Heavyweight Championship match. And let's see here. The very first match on this event. One thing I thought was interesting, by the way, about this event that you may not be prepared for if you haven't watched it yet on the WWE Network is this seems like footage that's almost like discovered. I don't want to say discovered footage, but the fact that all the shows aren't there lets you know, I guess it's not as easy to come by. So I think during the time, like you could only get like this particular show and like on VHS or something. It was like one of the only ones they put out on VHS. And, but there's no commentary on this thing, which I thought was really interesting. So you're watching a show, I mean, with some good camera angles and everything, that's not the issue, but it's kind of weird because you get all the noises from the ring. Did that put anybody else off? Because it did me for a little bit.
It actually didn't put me off. It did the opposite. I actually loved it. I was sitting here, one of my biggest beefs with modern wrestling, not Joe Galley and Stu Bennett, they're excluded from what I'm about to say, but one of my biggest beefs is the commentary and the fact that, so the more I watched this show, and yes, I did realize at first the huge void that there was no commentary. I would have loved to hear a Shivani or JR or somebody like that, those classic voices, but like it enabled me to enjoy the wrestling show like I was there. And I don't think we realize how different the experience can be when there is no commentary, but you can still hear the crowd pops and you can still, so it's not watching a show on mute. It's actually just getting the experience like you're there. And you could really feel, so instead of listening to commentary, I was listening to the crowd response. I was listening to the guys in the ring, work on each other. And that was such a unique experience for me that I haven't had since last time I was at a live wrestling show. And I actually really enjoyed it. So you asked, did it put me off? No, the opposite. It actually like pulled me in a little further. And by the time I got through, halfway through this opening bout with Steve Regal and Sam Houston, I was like, this is super cool, and just thoroughly enjoyed the rest of the show because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I get at the time, I guess I've always known that version of this event. That's the one that I grew up on. So maybe if I were around today, I might have a different response. So I'm probably not as objective as I could be on this, but it doesn't, I never really thought about that until you just mentioned it, Gary. So it didn't put me off or anything.
Yeah. And when I say put me off, I wasn't like disgusted with it or anything like that. I just, It was kind of weird at first. Like I was like, especially because one of the things that I noticed that really stood out on it is, I'm used to like ring sounds, I think, but you could even hear like the rattle of the cables for like the ropes, like that. that was kind of interesting to me. Just like they would hit those ropes and you get that like clackety 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 sound. It was just kind of interesting. Like you got a lot of the sound effects. It also is really cool to see how these guys work the crowd though too, because there is a lot of crowd work going on in these matches, and some people are just masters at it. And I mean, right off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the stuff we're going to see from Ric Flair and like Jim Cornette and those guys. Like they just own that crowd, just like have them eating out of the palm of their hand. And it's pretty impressive. And you get to really experience that with no commentary over it. So I didn't know much about these guys. And Rob, I don't know if you have anything you want to add about these two, but Steve Regal defeated Sam Houston in the opening matchup here. And basically it's just he pins him with his foot up on the ropes, just like classic heel stuff. It's obviously like the opening match. They're getting people fired up and rowdy. But I will say another part that blew me away is, my God, that crowd was into it. Like this is the opening match, and that crowd was lit that whole time, and they were into it, like just behind Sam Houston the entire time, and just pissed off when Steve Regal gets the roll up and puts his legs up on the ropes, and they're behind it when Houston like goads him back into the ring to get into a fist fight, and they have a fist fight, and like Houston's getting the better of him until Regal rolls out and escapes. But Regal does get the win here. Any thoughts on this one, guys, or any backstory you can give us, Rob?
Yeah, this is a gem of a match. It's these are two really important guys, and at the time they were embroiled over a championship belt that's not really been active for a while. I don't know if Jay Cal's in the chat or not, but he can tell you about this too. The Junior Heavyweight Championship is one of the most venerated titles. It is a world's championship. It was owned, operated, dominated by a guy named Nelson Royal for many years, and Denny Brown was in that discussion along with Sam Houston and whatnot. But Steve Regal and Denny, they wrestle for this belt several times. It's like every time they would even do it on Saturday, on the Saturday shows and stuff. And here we have Sam Houston entering that junior heavyweight title picture, and I think he even held the belt up once or twice. This is, by the way, the husband of Baby Doll, Sam Houston is. And Steve Regal, an interesting little curious feature is Steve Regal is considered one of those unofficial members of the Freebirds. Jimmy Garvin was a legit full-blooded member, if anyone has any doubt about that. But for a time in the AWA, Steven Regal would be brought into that organization too, and he would work with Jimmy Garvin, of course, in the Freebirds, and do some other things. But when I first got acquainted with Steven Regal, it was his connection with Jimmy Garvin that I remembered. And then he immediately came in and had a feud with Denny Brown, which may have been featured in the Bash. I know it was about that. It was either 85 or 86. It was right around there. But Sam Houston was a pretty important guy too. He was one of those really close friends with Magnum TA and with Dusty Rhodes when they were doing the whole Midnight Rider gimmick sometimes to throw the Four Horsemen off, or the Midnight Express. Sam Houston would show up as the Midnight Rider and not Dusty Rhodes, and everybody would like tripping out. Dusty Rhodes would show up on stage, and it would be Sam Houston as the Midnight Rider. He had a completely different physique and everything. But this is actually a gem. I enjoy.
For what it's worth, Denny Brown and Regal fought to a draw on the opener of the July 5th Great American
So
Bash.
It was 86. I was thinking it might have been the 85 Bash, but yeah, it was right around this time when they did that. So this is a match that has junior World Heavyweight Championship implications, and obviously, Denny Brown is also going to be on this card too, doing other things. But I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was like Sam Houston was incredibly over with the crowd, and I'm not gonna pretend to be the wrestling historian that Rob is and say when I read this card that I knew who all these people were. But I mean, that crowd reaction definitely caused me to look deeper and learn more about Sam Houston, and had a great career, and great guy. A lot of stuff Rob just covered. Just the importance.
Dave Scooby pointing out in the chat that he's Jake Roberts' little brother. Is that correct?
He's half brother,
Yes.
yeah.
Half brother.
Gotcha. Sorry, Will, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
yeah. But I mean that, and that again, another reason why I actually liked not having commentary is because I am like, as most of us probably are as wrestling fans, I'm like a crowd pop guy. Like I get into those crowd pops, and it was the opening bout, and that probably had a lot to do with it. But man, you could tell like as soon as he showed up on the scene, man, that crowd was lit. And I thought the whole match was great. It was a screwy finish. I'm not a big fan of screwy finishes. I like how they milked it a little bit, and they kind of acted like they were going to restart the match. I think, like he was trying to convince the ref, that was screwy, and then Regal was like, "Nah, screw this. I won. I'm out of here." So I thought it was good, and I could definitely. I mean, it left me wanting more. Rob, to your point, to see these two guys continue to feud and to throw a belt in the mix like that would definitely be interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the crowd reaction. Again, Houston's one of the guys too. I think about is just like that they love him. They loved him as a baby face. Like you could tell the crowd was behind him. That's one of the things that really gets this show over when you can sit back and watch it, is just how into this show's crowd is the entire time. And it's pretty impressive. It seems like a great, like big crowd too. Like it just felt big. Like I enjoyed the show a lot. So the next matchup on the card would have been, I enjoyed this one. It was Black Bart and the Barbarian taking on Denny Brown and the Italian Stallion. And so this was a pretty straightforward match. Black Bart and Barbarian defeated Denny Brown and Italian Stallion after the Barbarian hits a flying headbutt off the top. Standout for this one for me was the Barbarian, and just that I've always thought that guy was huge and menacing, but you could really tell they were behind him in that way. A little while 80s with the Barbarian, he kind of becomes a member of the Heenan family in the WWF, and that's how I always knew him growing up. And I always thought he seemed like a badass, but he never got booked quite as badass as I thought he should be around when Hogan's throwing him around or something. But during this time, nobody gets nothing on the Barbarian. Like the Barbarian whoops ass throughout this match.
Yeah, he was a standout for sure. That was my same takeaway, Gary. Just that, I've seen the Barbarian here and there, as you mentioned, but in this match particularly, I was like, dude is a hoss. He's a worker. Like he put out an incredible effort and really made the match for me. In an otherwise not super interesting match. Obviously, me not having the context of any storyline, Rob, you may know a little more about those four gentlemen and them working together. But just within the confines of just a wrestling match, I thought it was a great match. I thought he had a lot to do with
it. Denny Brown and Black Bart, I know we talked about them. They were both in the junior heavyweight title picture and the Mid-Atlantic Championship, which is a very historic title as well. Interesting thing about this match is that
Black Bart was the champion at this time.
Right.
Sorry, I keep jumping.
No, you're fine. They were in the stable. Black Bart was. We had a discussion a few weeks back on factions versus stables, and both Black Bart and Conga, the Barbarian, he would go by Conga, the Barbarian, and eventually just became the Barbarian. But they were in the stable with Paul Jones, along with like T.J. Khan, Baron von Raschke, Shasta Pistol Pez Watley, the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, and so this was one of the instances in which we have the number one Paul Jones Army in action, not involving necessarily Jimmy Valiant directly, but Denny Brown was a very close friend of Jimmy Valiant, and so the war was playing out on this front. The other interesting thing is that the Italian Stallion. Some of you, I know James Lawrence is going to remember this. Scooby might know. Italian Stallion was one of those what we call enhancement talents. He was a preliminary guy. A lot of times he would go in and they like to say do the job, except he was one that was really, really good, like kind of like action Mike Jackson. He sort of always fell short. He was in an exchange with Ric Flair and actually pinned Ric Flair in a non-title match on one of the Saturday shows. And this set up a little feud with Ric Flair and the Italian Stallion, and there was a lot of fanfare around him. So coming, and I don't know, I can't remember. Maybe someone in the chat can enlighten us here. I can't remember if it was before or after this, but the Italian Stallion was very, very respected, and he was not. This wasn't considered a sure thing for Paul Jones' Army, but this is basically another battle in the Jimmy Valiant versus Paul Jones Army war, which had so much meaning for the fans, and which is going to come to a climax here on this particular in this bash between Paul Jones himself and Jimmy Valiant.
Yeah, you know, I had not seen Black Bart, so that was a little treat for me here too. I had not really, just not seen many matches with Black Bart. I'd always heard of Black Bart and heard stories about Black Bart, but had never seen him in action. So that was interesting for me. But again, man, the Barbarian. Just one thing that really stood out to me, if I could just say, is go back and watch this match, and he throws like the big boot at one point, and it looks like he is murdering someone. Like, it is not like when Hogan would hold the big boot and a guy just runs face first into Hogan's boot. Like, Barbarian like lunges, like throws the boot in your face. Like, he's like, I'm taking your head. Like, it's mine now. And I was blown away by that. I was like, he just killed someone. That is crazy. But anyway, he was very good. I could see why people were behind him. Yeah. And probably just, he was probably more of a body guy. Maybe I just like big tough guys like that. But it just anyway, just a fun match. Next up, we had Manny Fernandez defeating Baron von Raschke with Paul Jones that Rob just mentioned. It was a loaded glove on a pole match, which was just kind of fun. You don't see many of those. My mind always takes me back just because of the age I am, I guess, to the coal miner's glove match, spin the wheel, make a deal, but with like Jake the Snake. But anyway, loaded glove on a pole match. Baron von Raschke. One thing that was blowing me away so far about this show, by the way, too, was that Barbarian and Bart went over, and so did Steve Regal. So you've got the first two opening matches on the show are heels taking the win here. And then Von Raschke ends up getting the glove first, ends up trying to swing on Manny Fernandez, but Manny ends up dodging it every single time and then just gets a quick like flying body press and for the pin 1, 2, 3, and gets a quick win, and he's out of there. So it's a fun little match, but it's always cool. I like seeing Baron von Raschke anyway. I think he's kind of a cool wrestler.
Yeah, one thing that it's probably applicable to bring up at this point, this is when I believe the show turned into the Great American Bloodbath, because I think every match from here on out, there was blood in some form or fashion. This one was Baron von Raschke with, I forget the name of the move when he palms the dude's head. I'm sure there's a name for it.
Oh, the claw.
The claw, yeah, the claw. When he put the claw on and Manny was just bleeding, I mean, it looked brutal. Stuff like that really, really gets you going in terms of, when we talk about authenticity and things like that. It's just super cool to see. Yeah, I mean, it was a great match. I love the story it told. I love Manny Fernandez. I think he's everything I've ever seen him in. He was great, and so that was a treat to get to see him. And I thought it was a great match.
Manny Fernandez here is about to, and I don't think we're going to be covering any of the Bash show here as we go on. So this won't be a spoiler, but Manny Fernandez is about to make a heel turn. He is a baby here, and he's going to accept Paul Jones's money shortly after this match to join the Army. And eventually, I don't remember if it was this year or maybe 87. I think might have been later this year. He and Ravishing Rick Rude form a tag team and actually beat Ricky and Robert for the belt and had one of the greatest NWA title runs ever. They were a stout tag team, he and Rick Rude. So just a little bit of context there.
Oh, that's good stuff. All right, and then we'll move on to the next matchup, which you want to talk about a bloodbath. Well, it gets really going in this one when Wahoo McDaniel takes on Jimmy Garvin with Precious in an Indian strap match. And, I mean, I don't know. It wasn't but like 5 minutes into this, it felt like. And all of a sudden, Wahoo McDaniel was just a blood fountain. He was just like his head turned into a spigot. He had the proverbial crimson mask just pouring down his face. And this match was a lot of fun, by the way. I really liked this. I think Jimmy Garvin and Wahoo were really cool to watch. And Wahoo just seems like tough as nails. And Jim plays that perfect chicken shit heel kind of guy. Just scared of what he's going to do and doesn't want to be tied up to him. And it was just a lot of fun. Wahoo obviously gets the win here because good talk, everybody.
Okay. Well, you
were breaking up. You were breaking. I was going to jump in, but you were breaking up. I don't know if it was your internet or mine, but I didn't know if you were done.
Oh, no, it does say, yeah, my internet just went unstable. Weird. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I was
trying to put that on us, man.
My
favorite. That's what we deal with, man.
My favorite part of this match was I like how Wahoo used the strap to keep Garvin in the ring. That was, because it's a classic heel move. They're intimidated. They don't want to fight. They're chicken. They roll out. And every time he did, Wahoo would pull him back in the ring. I thought that was super entertaining to see. That was kind of, he literally kept him on a leash and made him come fight him. So that was a really cool aspect of it.
Yeah, Wahoo McDaniel, man, one of the all-time greats. Ric Flair regularly cites him as one of the toughest, hardest opponents ever. Held the U.S. championship. I think Magnum TA won the U.S. title from Wahoo, if I'm not mistaken. And here, Jimmy Garvin, one of my probably top 5 favorites of all time, man. In an amazing match, and was escorted by Precious, the beautiful, gorgeous, matchlessly pretty Precious. Just the Indian strap match, man. It's classic. Love it. Great storytelling again.
Was Precious your first love, Rob?
My first love was Missy Hyatt.
There you go.
And Tila from Masters of the Universe.
I don't blame you there either. All right, so next up in the event, we had Tully Blanchard with J.J. Dillon defeats Ron Garvin in a taped fist match. Did not see this one going this way, but they did a great job of really just getting Ron Garvin over as like a tough SOB, just like beating the snot out of Tully Blanchard the entire time. And even after Tully gets the glove loaded up by JJ, Ron still stays on top of it for a little bit, but finally just squeaking out a win there when they head outside. But thoughts on this match, fellas?
A lot of blood. A lot more blood.
Boy, Tully Blanchard was a freaking biohazard, man. That sugar was a bleeder. He and Magnum TA back in '85 had this fantastic I Quit match, and it's like, I think it was 5. It's in a cage, and it's like Tully Blanchard is just he's one of those ones like Dusty and Flair, man. He can't walk into a ring without getting busted open. But fantastic match. I always like Ronnie Garvin. I don't think he gets enough respect. Tully Blanchard's one of the greatest of all time. No doubt about it. He's the very first really cool bad guy, and so again, this is this story right here is the not really faction or stable, but just the NWA fam that existed in those days between Magnum, Ronnie, Dusty, and the Rock and Roll Express and Sam Houston against one of the guys that were that was with the Horseman, Tully Blanchard, and so they had this perennial feud from late '85 all the way through '87, '88, and it was always those guys in the mix. So this is their fam representing the Horseman fam, and it was it'd be like if me and Gary and Will and Jay Cal and RJ and WWE Front Row and Wrestling with MMA went up against Pritchard and all his guns, we'd kill them. We'd bust that tail.
Well, that's basically what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's essentially it.
Yeah, this match,
clearly we're winning.
The other thing I noted about this match, they introed it by saying it was going to be, I think, 10 3-minute rounds. and with 30 seconds between each round for rest. And immediately when they said that, I said, that's too long. That is too much. And luckily it only went 4 rounds out of the 10. So I was nothing against those guys. But this obviously wasn't a traditional wrestling match, which I'm here for traditional wrestling matches. Some gimmicks, which there were a lot in this event. But this was one of the gimmicks that I was like, that would be too much. So thankfully it went 4 rounds. And this was just your classic story of, Tully gets attacked before the match really even starts. He never really rebounds from that and then gets the edge at the end. And so it was a good story overall. I think they were right on the verge of giving it too much time in this show, but I was happy.
Yeah. Two things would be that, I noticed that the announcer here, he was having a little trouble anyway, because he also announced like Rod Garvin, that he had won the match and he had clearly not won the match. And so he had to correct that, which I'm sure wrecked the minds of that crowd. Also, I pictured Rob Stinson as more of an evil in kind of guy. It's not into the bad girls, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Weird laugh there. That was a weird laugh.
I know, it's a really weird laugh. He was like, "Oh, like Tila's the kind of girl you take home to your mama, but I'd be sneaking out for some evil in every now and then." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's right. That's what's up.
Man, I am really creeped out by the weird laughs that Rob is giving about this whole conversation.
Not like you haven't heard that laugh before, Gary.
We have not. I have not heard that before. That was new for me.
Hey, just in the spirit of full disclosure, I also was really into the sorceress, Tila's mom. She was hot as a mug too in Masters of the Universe. So it's not just the bad girls, okay?
No, it's true. This sounds like a video you could find on certain sites, though. So we're gonna move on.
Those sites don't sponsor us yet.
Those sites don't sponsor us. We'll work on that. We'll let Rob get on that. Anyway, all right, let's move on to the next matchup. We'll do a He-Man episode later. The Rock and Roll Express, Ricky and Robert, take on the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, Ole and Arn Anderson, and they go to a draw in this tag team matchup. Very good match, by the way, just all around. I don't know what else to even say about it. This is a clinic. These guys are like, all of these guys are just really good at what they do. And God bless Arn Anderson. God bless Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson. Ole looks like he's just mean as hell. That's it's just a fun match to watch.
I mean, the first thing I noticed is this made me really excited for what could happen with the Young Bucks and FTR, because that's what I felt like. It felt like that same kind of rivalry.
That's a good point.
And
right.
So that was one of the dots that I connected with then to now, because obviously the Young Bucks take so much of their stuff from rock and roll. I mean, they're essentially the modern day rock and roll. They haven't accomplished the same stuff, and they still have a lot of legacy to build ahead of them. But that comparison, as I was watching this match, was just really cool. But it looked like two super cool rock stars fighting two dads. Like, it was just such an interesting dynamic there. But it was a great match, man. Arn Anderson's my all-time favorite, partly because of his ability to sell. He was selling that leg this whole match. I mean, you believe that Arn Anderson is in a fight no matter who he's fighting. He was carrying that TV title, and like he did so often. And so it was a really fun match. Again, like you said, just a clinic. But I mean, all parties involved came to play in it, and it was a stellar bout. We lost Rob because I mentioned another wrestling promotion. I mentioned the Young Bucks and
falls
FTR,
off every time.
Rob fell asleep.
You're I'm just thinking, like, you're right, man. That's good summary. Anything the Rock and Roll Express did was magic. The Minnesota Wrecking Crew, although this version is not probably the best version of that team, they're pretty freaking good. And you can't put you can't put anything. I mean, like you said, the way Arn Anderson sells is amazing. I want to say that Ricky and Robert, gosh, man, I can't quite remember. I think that Ricky and Robert at one point switched the belts with Ole and Arn. Did that happen?
That feels right, actually. I feel like
Yeah, I think that happened. I can't. I know that Ricky and Robert won the belts from the Russians, but I think at some point around this time frame there was a title switch, and of course the Midnight Express comes into the mix also. There's no love lost between it. Again, this is another iteration of the feud between the Dusty Rhodes led faction and the Four Horsemen. So every match is important. Every match has implications with what's going on in the broader context of the NWA. Nothing is just randomly thrown in here. So.
Yeah. Next match on the card had Paul Jones taking on Jimmy Valiant. Paul Jones has Shaska Watley in his corner, and they are doing a hair versus hair match. This was like, I don't know. I was super into this idea, and I really like Jimmy Valiant, I think, but for some reason I never got as into this match as I wanted to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the match wasn't good. Just so people know, we're not like just putting over everything we see in vintage wrestling. This wasn't a good match. The hair cutting at the end was interesting, but it was like a little bit scary. Jimmy Valiant's facial expression, like he looked like he had a mood swing mid head shave, like that kind of freaked me out, and I didn't know if they were like going anywhere with that. But yeah, I mean, this was a gimmick match at its finest. I mean, I'm sure for the live crowd at the time, and Rob, you may have some context for this as well that we don't, but I'm sure it was meaningful, but it was kind of a little lull for me in this show.
You're not going to get standard technical wrestling from either Pistol Pez Watley or Jimmy Valiant. They're both great wrestlers, great entertainers. That's not what you're going to get. You're going to get, they're basically fighters, both of them. And this was outstanding match. I have to disagree respectfully because of the context. I mean, Pistol Pez Watley and Jimmy Valiant were friends for years, as was the Raging Bull Manny Fernandez. They were a family. They tagged together for years and years and years. Pistol Pez Watley had only recently joined the Army. He and if I remember correctly, again, some of you guys can correct me, there was an interview with Jimmy Valiant and Pistol Pez Watley, and they were just talking about their war with Paul Jones and the Barbarian and Baron and all those guys. And at one point in the match, or in the interview, Valiant makes the comment just in passing that he has Pistol Pez Watley with him, the greatest black wrestler of all time. And when he said the greatest black wrestler, Pez Watley stops in mid-interview and he attacks and turns on Jimmy Valiant. And we learned that he'd been bought out and had joined the Army. Well, Jimmy Valiant is a regular guy. He would always make interviews about, hey, I've got, I'm making ends meet. I'm just gonna have this job on the side, and I'm a millionaire. And the only thing I have to offer up is my hair. That's all I have to give. And so he put his hair on the line in this match, lost the match. Well, guess what? There are 2 other hair versus hair matches in this match. So later on, since he loses his hair at this point, his sidekick, his longtime girlfriend, who he called Big Mama, and he actually had Big Mama's name tattooed on his knuckles, he put Big Mama's hair up against later on Paul Jones's hair and Shaska Watley's hair in this feud. And of course, as we know, Jimmy Valiant wins those 2 matches and gets his revenge later on. But this was the one that sort of, Jimmy Valiant had that long blonde hair, and that was his thing, and kind of like Josephus. Let me tell you, the people who perfected, the guys who perfected the hair versus hair genre of matches that we still see going on today was Jimmy Valiant and Paul Jones. So this has important historic implications even for the NWA today.
Very cool. Love getting that backstory on it from Rob Stinson. That's why we hired the good doctor, because he can provide us with that. So for me, I mean, you know, obviously we didn't have that kind of context, I guess, and so that's why Will and I had that little lull there. But it would be quickly reversed for myself when we get to the very next matchup, which is Magnum TA versus Nikita Koloff in their best of 7 series. Now, I did get a little context on this one at the time. I remember basically Bob Geigel was overseeing a interview between Nikita Koloff or like the Russians, and Magnum TA would have like his mom like there at the table too, and they were discussing it, and Nikita kept taunting him, basically telling him he's a mama's boy. She's got him by the apron strings, that kind of stuff, just pushing him. And in the little video clip that I saw, essentially he says that, you know, this basically just goes to proof that, you know, Russian women are superior and know their place and American women are trash or something like that. And this pisses off Magnum TA, and he jumps on him, and this gets out of hand. Bob Geigel kind of tries to interfere, settle things down, and Magnum TA ends up slapping him across the face, basically. And this causes Magnum TA to be stripped of the United States Championship, essentially. And he and Nikita are going to have a best of 7 series to determine who's going to be the new U.S. champion. And at this point in the best of 7 series, I think, let me see here. Yeah, it was Koloff was up by 3. And this was going to mean that Magnum needed 4 straight wins to go. Now, for history's sake, it's worth noting this best of 7 series ends up being like a 9-match series. It doesn't go 7. And but the important part of this one is it's a badass match, and Magnum gets his first win, a very emotional win, and begins his trek to getting back to winning the best of 7 tournament. I just, man, I watched this, and you can totally see why Magnum's the man. And you could totally see, like, Nikita is such a freaking hoss. Like, he is just like the perfect wrestler. Like, he just looks like the perfect wrestler. I mean, he just looks like an action figure, I guess is what I'm going for. And it's just, what a fun match. And there's a part where Magnum like busts his head on the post, and I thought he was dead, and he barely makes it back in for the 10 count at one point. And anyway, just a great match, but Magnum does come out on top, and that crowd freaking goes nuts when he wins that matchup. But I'll stop rambling. What did you guys think of this one?
You hit the nail on the head, man. Nikita Koloff looked great. You know, having more context for this feud, obviously I was a little more bought in to the match as a whole. It was insanely good. You know, anytime I see a Magnum TA match, I do get a little sad for what could have been, you know, had he not had his accident. And but I'm glad we got what we got with this feud. I think it's one of those landmark things in pro wrestling, especially NWA pro wrestling. I thought the finish was interesting to this particular bout, but yeah, man. I mean, this was the treat of the night for me, hands down.
This is one of the, along with the Paul Jones stuff, and I know that's going to sound a little bit weird because they, you know, they're not, you know, main eventers, but along with the Paul Jones stuff, this was the emotional high point of the whole Bash thing, the Nikita Magnum thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, what Ric Flair and Dusty do later is very important, and that series of defenses was the most important thing for sure. And you guys know that I think that I've said this before. I think the Dusty Flair match is my favorite match of all time, in the greatest year of all time. But the Magnum TA Nikita Koloff best of 7 series is the emotional peak of this. And there is an outstanding RF video or high spots interview with Nikita and Magnum called The Feud. And in it, like what you were saying, they said this wasn't just really a 7-match deal. They did several house shows larger than that, like every time they'd go, because there wasn't a lot of syndication and people weren't seeing these matches, that every time they'd go to a town, they'd bill it as one of the 7. And then when they did these visible matches, they would ascribe a number to it, and it's part of the story writing. But I was afraid of Nikita, man. I was afraid of Nikita Koloff in those days. He was a monster. He was one of those really big dudes like the Road Warriors. He would go on to have a really historic feud with Ric Flair even. And I just remember, and this is the height of the Cold War too. So there's that world context too, where everything was so believable. Kayfabe was a real thing back then. And you know, when I saw Ivan and Nikita and then Crusher Khrushchev turn and join the Russians, he was an American before that, but I believed it. Like, I was terrified of these guys. And this series, man, was like, gosh, man, it emotionally after this happened, everything else was downhill, from the sense that you felt like you couldn't really invest your heart into anything else that happened, because Magnum TA was representing Old Glory, man. He was representing the red, white, and blue, and we felt it. You know, it was by the way, just as a little side note, Nikita Koloff, who's coming on Piper's Notes the Friday after next, he's actually a relative of mine. So through marriage and this and that, but we talked a little
Nobody
bit about
helped
that.
you out with that when you were scared of him?
Well,
this is your uncle.
I wasn't related to him yet. I only got related to him when he's actually related through my wife Tanya. My wife Tanya's dad is Nikita Koloff's deceased wife's brother. So you know, he had a part of the storyline of him becoming a babyface was Mandy Koloff, his beautiful wife, passed away in for real, and they had, you know, Perestroika, and of course Magnum went through his very tragic injury, and that all played into Nikita Koloff becoming one of the great baby faces ever, and joining forces with Dusty Rhodes to form the Superpowers. But Nikita's wife Mandy is my wife's dad's sister. So what's that? Aunt-in-law? I don't know how you. So.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that feels right. No, that's cool, man. The thing is with this, I mean, for context, it's what I really enjoyed was just seeing these guys, two guys like really solidly in their prime, doing battle here. And what would end up happening is Magnum get his 3 wins in the official series, and they would wrestle like 2 more matches that both went to like double DQ. And so it would take a 9th match in Charlotte and later in August. So it would go outside of the Great American Bash series. And Koloff would finally get the win and take the U.S. championship. But that was actually, and we'll do a deep dive on Magnum someday and Nikita, I'm sure. But it was actually just to help move along, like all of this long-term planning, man. This was all to build that like Ric Flair was going to keep being dastardly and win the title back from Dusty, and Magnum would move on from the U.S. title and move on to take on Ric Flair and win the World's Heavyweight Championship eventually. But of course, as Rob pointed out, that due to the accident, that doesn't end up happening. Anyway, one of my other favorite matches from this show that was just a nice, more lighthearted bit of fun, even if the Road Warriors were involved, who looked like they would just destroy anybody who crossed paths with them. It was the Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk, with Baby Doll and Paul Ellering, and they defeated the Midnight Express, Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, along with Jim Cornette. Now, my highlights of this match include the fact that Jim Cornette owns the audience like nobody else. Just him trying to escape a tag by climbing up the side of the cage, like all of that stuff's fun. Or like when anybody comes near him, he like ducks by the ropes, and you can hear the people just like buying into everything Cornette does. Also, Road Warriors are badasses, and Bobby Eaton is still a god, and there is that. And Dennis Condrey, honestly, is really amazing too. So these guys, I never appreciated them as much as I should have, and over the last like year, I have learned to really just freaking love the Midnight Express. I think they are quite possibly the greatest tag team that ever existed. So anyway, you guys go ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting to have a steel cage match before the steel cage match, the main event. That was one of the things. It was almost like a steel cage warm-up match. But yeah, it was, I mean, always entertaining. Jim Cornette always has the audience in the palm of his hand, even if, especially because they hate him. But I think everything went off the way it was supposed to in this match, and it came across. And Baby Doll getting the pin was perfect, I thought.
Yeah, Baby Doll had been with Tully Blanchard. She was his longtime, arm candy and sidekick, and she had left Tully Blanchard. There was a big feud between her and the Midnight Express. At one point, Jim Cornette gained. Of course, Jim Cornette is always embroiled in controversy. But at one point, he actually hit Baby Doll at a time when that was not. This is well before the Attitude Era. You didn't hit women. It didn't happen a lot. You had other women do that, or every now and again, a guy would, jerk a girl around, but you didn't do that. Well, Jim Cornette actually hit Baby Doll in the abdomen with his tennis racket, and she was hospitalized, and that set the tone for this feud. But again, the Road Warriors, the most devastating tag team of all time versus maybe the greatest tag team of all time. So in the cage. So fantastic.
I was going to mention that yeah, I was reading a little bit up on the context as well in this feud, and it was that yeah, him and Baby Doll had several battles up and down the East Coast, just based off the fact that he had nailed her in the gut with the tennis racket, and people just absolutely hated him and wanted to murder Jim Cornette.
They wanted him fired, man. They wanted him fired. They didn't want him in the show.
Mentioned on the July 5th show of the Great American Bash, it was Dusty and Magnum that were in the match against the Night Express, and they had Baby Doll. They were apparently a big part of this feud too because of Dusty and Baby Doll's relationship. And I was even reading about at one point that they came in as the James Gang, Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes, and ended up tying Jim Cornette up by his neck and tying him to the bumper of the car and dragging him around. I was like, oh my God, this is nuts.
Actually, I think there's a couple of instances in which they do a 6-man type thing, and Baby Doll's the third partner on one end and Cornette's on the other end, and Baby Doll gets her hands on Cornette and just manhandles him. It's hilarious.
Yeah, well, they started off really good in this one with Cornette egging her on to get into the ring to take him on one-on-one if she had any guts, and but that's just a ruse to get Eaton, who runs and jumps into the ring and runs at Baby Doll, but Baby Doll ends up hitting the arm drag, which was kind of cool on Bobby Eaton, and Bobby Eaton sells it like a champ. And of course, the ending is Baby Doll just knocking the hell out of I'm sorry, Jim Cornette. Rob just sent me a meme on my phone, and it's like a prairie dog and turd coming out of somebody's butt. So it's just put
that evil on me. I'm just doing my work as a journalist, Gary.
Listen, he probably got it from your Instagram stories.
Well, it's going to be on my Instagram story. I can tell you that much. Anyway, let's head to the main event. We're talking Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. A steel cage bloodbath between these two legends. And it's everything that it's supposed to be, as these two are most well-known names in wrestling history, and it's exactly what you want out of them. The biggest surprise for me, I have to say, watching this is I don't know if I realized how much Ric behind him, as far as crowd reaction. I feel like the crowd was kind of into Ric Flair even during this. There was a lot of people that were just kind of this guy's too good, love this guy, just that same kind of deal that we talk about with Aldis or something now. But I know Ric Flair's at a point in his career now that literally there's nothing for the past 10 to 15 years, there's nothing Ric Flair could do that can make him a heel. But even during this time in '86, it felt like the crowd was they just respected him too much. He just had the oomph, the aura, and especially, by the way, added to it by the fact that I don't know if it's just the tape we're watching or if nobody really had entrance music except for him, but he's the only one on the tape. And when he comes out to his music, it's just something about it is just even more epic. Like he is he is Darth Vader coming to the ring or something. Like he is just, there's something way more epic.
Who?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, Will, you wouldn't get that reference. Anyway, it's just he's a really important person.
Dumbledore?
He's like an emperor coming to the ring, and yeah. Anyway,
yeah, it was very ceremonious. That was one of the things that I noted as well. And I mean, the cool thing to me about this, we just covered the Great American Bash 1990 a couple of weeks or a few weeks back, and just to think about the 4-year gap between these shows. And Rick was still, and we all know that he has a long, legendary career, but getting to see 1986 Ric Flair is at the top of his game. He is, he's respected, as you just mentioned. I don't want to use the term over because he wasn't, a babyface necessarily. And as we see in this match, Dusty obviously was, but to see how over he was then and respected, and then 4 years later, he's still at that spot. That's unheard of nowadays. The guys come and go. They're almost here today, gone today. Like that's how quick runs in modern wrestling are. And so that just gave me another level of context for Flair and his position, not only in the NWA, but just in wrestling in general.
Right. And you think, Flair is in the midst of his, officially, he's in the midst of his second title reign here. And he is roughly, give or take a couple hundred days, because when you're up to, 600-700 days, what's another 100 days, right? He's roughly about where Nick Aldis is now. I think Rick's a little bit further along. But by this point, Rick is already. This is why when we have these debates about should we now be considering Nick Aldis one of the greats of all time, I'm going to tell you right now, guys, based on what Gary said in that reaction that was really there, and James Lawrence, who went and saw one of these matches in person, yes, in 1986, Ric Flair was already regarded as maybe the greatest of all time. And he is where Nick Aldis is now. So it's not premature. It's perfectly legitimate. And the quality of opponents was about where Nick's is. So it was a great, but this is my favorite match of all time, man, even though my man Flair loses in this match. If you watch the WWE's packaged documentaries on Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, both of them use this match as sort of the benchmark of their feud. And they have, Sweet Victory is playing in the background. It's just perfect, man. And what a Greek myth right here. You want to talk about literature. You really want to talk about wrestling being high culture. This is it.
Well, hey, it's funny you mentioned that because I was actually looking at some of the results on the site, 411 Mania, and the guy gives this 9 out of 10. And he points out in his recap of this match, he says here at the end, Dusty recovers quickly and throws Flair into the wall for a 2. Elbowed by Dusty, misses. Flair tries to slam him. Dusty leans back and turns it into a cradle for 3. And the crowd is not expecting this. Dusty Rhodes is the new World's Heavyweight Championship. All of the baby faces head back to the ring to congratulate him while Flair is left alone in the corner, totally ignored, which, if you'll recall, November 1983, when Ric Flair was in a cage surrounded by baby faces celebrating his world title win, and the old champ was left alone in the corner, totally ignored. That's art.
Mm-hmm. It is. And another thing about that, we always talk about gimmick matches, and you guys know where I feel about that. But the one that I've always said I like is 2 out of 3 and the cage match. And the cage match, historically, when it's done right, it is designed to end the reign of the bad guy, to cut out all the shenanigans, and to give the good guy finally a fair shake. Happened in 83, and now the tables are turned. It happens to Flair in 86. So it's just like I'm getting chills right now, guys. I really am.
And this was and this was like a brutal cage. This isn't like the cages now that are really nice and buttoned up and these nice clean corners. I mean, when they were on the top of the cage and Dusty was, bashing Flair's head in on top, you could see the spikes of the steel fence that were coming up above. I mean, it was brutal, man. Again, it wasn't like even Hell in a Cell. Even Hell in a Cell is brutal, but like they have smooth edges and all that kind of stuff and the top covering and all that. This was like a fence that you see in someone's yard. That this was very unrefined, very like backyard brawl style, and that just added that element of that realness to it. And it was nuts, man.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I'd just like to point out is like when we talk about gimmick matches and that sort of thing, like I almost don't even look at like I can't speak for Will, but at least for the time period when I grew up into wrestling, I considered those cage matches gimmick matches because they were like
Right.
the goal was to get out of the cage, and it turns it into like a game almost. And I always thought that's just how cage matches. I thought that's how they were supposed to be. But
that's the stupidest stipulation when it comes to cage matches. And now with this new wave, and I don't know how recent this is. I know like most modern quote unquote cage matches, like you can walk out the door. What is that? That's not a cage match. That's a door match. Like I've seen matches in WWE where guys like win the match by walking out having the ref open the door and they walk. That's ridiculous. This was a cage match. You had to win it in the cage. You couldn't climb out. If there was climbing out, it was to give that storyline element that like Ric Flair was trying to escape the beating that he was taking at the hands of Dusty Rhodes. It wasn't because he would win the match by climbing out, and it wasn't a race to climb out. Again, it's a true blue cage match. I mean, you had to win it inside the ring, fair and square, and that's what happened. Dusty won it.
Yeah, I think that was the weird part of it for me is like I never understood, and my logic didn't kick in until later, where it would be exactly like what we're talking about here. It's like, why would a babyface ever try to leave the fight? That's not what a babyface does. They're supposed to be like, you're trapped in there because you're trapped. Nobody can run away. Nobody can get out. Nobody can come in. There has to be a winner in this match, and that makes so much more sense. And then to get these two guys, they make it as brutal looking as it could possibly be, and it's a beautiful match. It really, really is. And I can't say enough good things about it. And it makes me appreciate a cage match. And it's so I think where I was going with that even was that I don't. It's almost like the cage match. I almost don't even count it like a gimmick match. It is, but it's just like, no, it just makes sense. Like, it's just like, let's get these guys in it. It's like the UFC uses the octagon, whatever. Like, it's just like that extra layer of protection to like, these two guys are going to fight until somebody can't go on. And it just makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so that's a Great American Bash 1986. I was looking through some other stuff, just record, just for that year. And the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, they had their one of their first, I believe, Dave Meltzer was kind of jumping into the thing here, and they had the voting. PWI Wrestler of the Year for 86 was Ric Flair. Tag Team of the Year was the Rock and Roll Express. And the match of the year was Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes at the Great American Bash. And just a lot of cool stuff like that. By the way, just for the record, PWI Rookie of the Year for this year was going to end up being Lex Luger. Oh, wow. So, but yeah, even in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, sorry, I was talking about PWI. Wrestling Observer was kicking in here too. And that's where Meltzer's at. Wrestler of the Year there was Ric Flair, also Most Outstanding of the Year, and Tag Team of the Year for them was the Midnight Express. So, Best Interview was Jim Cornette. So they NWA owning like most of these categories during this time. Hogan versus Orndorff was getting some love for the WWF side of things, I think, but the big dogs were still considered the NWA guys, like the real wrestlers. And Great American Bash got its love during this time as well as being one of the great events. That Dusty versus Flair match is going down as one of the all-time classics for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. Anything else you guys want to add for the Great American Bash 86?
Just that people, a lot of people will look back on Flair's back catalog of matches and they hold his series with Ricky Steamboat in as the hallmark, and it is. It's great stuff. I'm not saying that, but really it's the Dusty Rhodes Flair stuff that's it. And this match was, if there was ever a Super Bowl, it was this one. The other thing I was going to say is, and this just speaks to how good Crockett Promotions was, because honestly, freaking Hogan and Orndorff was pretty freaking good, man. That was a really intense feud with a guy that's one of my favorites of all time, Paul Orndorff. And, you talk about somebody elevating Hogan's game. Orndorff did it, and that feud was outstanding, but it wasn't Flair or Dusty. It's like, hey, we all got belts. The only difference is mine is gold and yours is silver.
Will, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, it was a great show. I really enjoyed it. There's another one, as you mentioned, on the WWE Network. Was it the Charlotte show? What was the other one? There was two of these on there. Greensboro, which is one we covered just now, and one other one. It's escaping me, but I'm definitely going to go watch that one just for fun.
Absolutely. I'll just add this one little tidbit of information for our listeners on the podcast portion. And what we're going to do here, just for anybody who doesn't know how this works, we're going to continue talking to you guys for just a little bit longer on the after show of NWA. This is the NWA After Dark. So stick around if you're in the live chat. We love you guys in the live chat. We want to hang out and talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. And in order for the listeners of the podcast to get that portion, you got to join us live. So you got to make sure you hit up youtube.com/the NWA pod and click that subscribe button. If you're in the chat right now and you haven't done that, please do that. It helps us get in front of more people, and share it with your friends. Give us a 5-star review if you're just a podcast listener. And I say just a podcast listener, I mean that with all the love and respect. We appreciate you guys for listening to us. And so we're trying to do a better job of keeping these things organized so they make for better podcast episodes, actually, because we feel like we've neglected you guys a little bit too much. So with that, I will add this one little piece of news before we wrap up the podcast portion of this. Just got an alert and just checked it for myself. The Bruce Pritchard interview about Nick Aldis that we played earlier in the show today will probably be on like a news portion for the podcast, talking about how Nick Aldis doesn't have quote unquote it, has been taken down.
Oh, buddy. So you heard it here. So
you can no longer find it on YouTube.
So you heard it here first and last.
Right. That clip has been removed from YouTube. So, but I would say, based on Twitter, too late. Too late.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
We're going to find out tomorrow.
Yep.
So we can't wait to hear what you guys think about that. Make sure you're tuned into Busted Open Radio on Monday. And
luckily, we have it here on this show, so you can go back and listen to it, whatever way to do, man. This is like, save this.
Assuming nobody tells Bruce or Conrad that they could just go here on this show and see that same video, that we'll still have it. So this will be fun. All right. Well, Will, tell everybody where they can find you on the social medias.
Yeah, at Hey It's Will with 1 L, pretty much everywhere. You can find me Hey It's Will Daily right here on this channel, where I cover wrestling news, wrestling culture from the perspective of an NWA fan like myself. And also every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, JCal from the Alliance blog and I go live on Instagram, and we do the Friday hot tag. This past week, we talked about matches we can't wait to see when Power returns. Talked about some feuds and things like that, and had a great conversation. Join us live on Instagram, or catch the video here on our channel, or the audio over on JCal's channel at the Alliance blog.
I am at rstinson4 on Twitter. You can find me here every Sunday and Tuesday night hanging out with you guys. We love you so much and love the time. And on Friday, my daughter and I Piper drop Piper's Notes, which is usually a discussion with a wrestler, a rock star, a wrestling super fan, just relating wrestling to the general culture. We just had Eddie Kingston, and we're the only place that you can find an Eddie Kingston post AEW interview. And we are, this next Friday, we've got one of our beloved family members, the lovely and amazing Dawn of Wrestling, will be on Piper's Notes, where we'll be covering Phantom of the Opera, music of the night. So look forward to that. And also just another news item, the Braves just beat the Mets 14-1. They are on pace to win 59 games this year, guys.
Wow. Go Braves. I know this is not, they don't do this anymore, but.
Well,
we do it.
I mean,
it'll
be up for debate sometime. All right. Well, I am at This Is Gary Horn. The show is at the NWA Pod on all the social medias. We hope you guys will join us and subscribe, like, save, forward, share, friends, all that stuff. Do the things. We're going to wrap up the podcast portion of this show. We want to thank you guys for listening to everything. Stick around if you're in the live chat, because we're just going live with you guys and talking for at least another 15, 20, 30 something minutes, depending. And we love you guys. And if you're listening to us, enjoy your gravy cake.